All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cutting straight through the hype to give you the definitive buyer's guide for the brand new MacBook Neo. There's been an absolute whirlwind of chatter online about this device lately. You've got some people claiming it's this hidden budget editing powerhouse, and then others who say it is just severely underpowered. So we're going to cut through all that noise right now using real hands-on testing data to figure out exactly what this machine is and honestly, more importantly, what it definitely isn't.
Okay, let's just dive right into the main question. If you're a student or a first-time buyer looking for an affordable way into the Apple ecosystem, is this the machine you should actually put your money down for? Look, when you hear the word budget and Apple in the same sentence, it almost never means cheap. What it really means is calculated compromises. So we need to figure out if the corners Apple cut here line up perfectly with your daily needs, or if they're going to end up driving you crazy.
To answer that, we're going to quickly run through its budget positioning, the actual physical compromises, its daily productivity power, who needs to completely avoid it, battery life, and then our final verdict.
Starting off with Section 1, the budget Apple laptop and its new entry point. Let's define exactly what this device is trying to be.
So starting at around 70,000 rupees in India, which, by the way, probably gets closer to 60,000 if you can snag a student discount, this 1.23 kilogram device is heavily positioned as Apple's true budget offering. Now, yes, the price tag is way lower than the new M4 Airs, which have easily crossed that 1 lakh mark, but the good news, Apple didn't sacrifice their core build quality. You are still getting that incredibly solid, premium metal feel that MacBooks are famous for, and it's light enough that tossing it in a backpack for campus or the office is totally effortless.
But when you put it right up against the MacBook Air, you do immediately notice where things differ. It feels just a tiny bit less premium. We're talking slightly thicker bezels and a standard physically clicking trackpad instead of that magical haptic one Apple usually uses. Plus, the speakers are just placed on the left and right sides, so they don't quite give you that rich depth the Air does. But even with those changes and keeping a solid 1080p webcam, it absolutely does not feel like a cheap laptop.
Moving right along to Section 2, Design and Hardware Compromises. This is where we look at exactly where Apple cut those corners.
Okay, so here's where the buyer beware alarms should start ringing just a little bit. Apple made some very intentional cuts here. First off, there is absolutely no backlight keyboard on the base model. Yeah, let that sink in. They also locked Touch ID behind the more expensive 512GB model, and they gave you one fast USB-C port, alongside another one that runs at a painfully slow 480 megabits per second. Like, that is a speed straight out of 2005. These are heavy segmentation choices. If you're studying in a dark dorm room, typing without backlight is going to get old real fast. And gating a basic security feature like Touch ID, that's a classic move to get you to just spend a little more. Oh, and no Thunderbolt support here either, guys.
As for the 13-inch display, it's actually pleasantly bright at 500 nits. Honestly, 500 nits for a laptop at this price point is fantastic. A lot of Windows competitors are only giving you 250 or 300 nits. But it is a 60 Hz glossy panel, and it completely lacks True Tone or the pro-level absolute color accuracy. It covers about 70% P3 and 97% sRGB. So what does that mean for you? The colors are perfectly fine for normal daily use, but if you need absolute pixel perfection for professional photo grading, this display just isn't going to cut it.
All right, Section 3, the Daily Productivity Engine. Since it's missing the Pro features, what does it actually do best? Underneath the keyboard is where things get really fascinating. It runs on the A18 Pro chip. Yes, that is the exact same mobile processor lifted right out of the iPhone, but because it's sitting inside a much larger laptop chassis instead of a tiny phone, it finally has room to breathe. The thermal management is fantastic, meaning it stays nice and cool under the workloads it was actually built for. And that brings us to the crucial takeaway here. This chip turns the Neo into a total daily productivity beast. If your day involves writing college essays, juggling a bunch of Excel spreadsheets, throwing together PowerPoints, having way too many browser tabs open for research, or doing some light photo tweaks in Lightroom, this machine feels blazing fast. This is the exact target audience. As a first-time buyer wanting a snappy, ultra-reliable machine for office or schoolwork, it handles all of that without breaking a sweat. Just look at how this breaks down in real life. Basic app launching and word processing, extremely smooth, flawless, really. But the second you throw heavy 4K Premiere Pro editing or 3D rendering at it, it completely crashes your workflow. The single-core performance of that A18 Pro chip is phenomenal for just popping open apps. It almost feels like an M4 chip in those split-second moments. But for long, heavy, sustained work, the architecture just hits a wall.
Which brings us to Section 4. Who should skip it? Time for the hard truth.
Let's be crystal clear about this. I know there are videos floating around out there saying this thing is a 4K editing dream. Look, if your profession involves multi-layered video editing, heavy visual effects, or serious gaming, do not buy this laptop. Skip it entirely. Sure, if you're dropping one single video clip on a timeline to make a quick trim, it works. But the moment you start adding text layers, color grading, or doing professional YouTube-level edits, it lags hard. It's not an editing rig, and it is definitely not for gaming.
The technical reason behind this is all about single-core versus multi-core performance. Single-core power, like we said, is fantastic for quick tasks, but multi-core power, which you need for heavy rendering, actually benchmarks lower than Apple's older M1 chip. Think about that for a second. When you run it through something like Cinebench, the score drops incredibly low because it just wasn't designed to handle intense parallel processing. And you really see this bottleneck when it comes to programming. In a real-world test compiling a heavy 10 GB C++ project, the M4 Air ripped through it in under 13 minutes. The Neo? It dragged on for 23 minutes, nearly double the time. Both laptops got hot, pushing their memory to the limit, but the Neo just couldn't keep pace. If you're a complete beginner just learning to code, you'll be fine. But if you compile code for a living, multiple times a day, this laptop will literally cost you hours of your life.
Let's jump to Section 5, Battery and Charging Basics. This is actually a really pleasant surprise. Thanks to that hyper-efficient mobile-first chip, you can easily squeeze out a very solid 10 to 11 hours of screen-on time during normal, everyday productivity stuff. That is phenomenal news if you're bouncing around campus all day or working from a cafe and really don't want to be hunting for a wall outlet. Even when we pushed it a bit harder, it still comfortably gave us around 8 hours.
Now, what makes that 10-hour battery life so wild is that the Neo only has a tiny 36-watt-hour battery inside it. For context, the MacBook Air has a 56-watt-hour battery. It really shows you just how little power that A18 Pro chip sips. There is a catch, though. Apple only gives you a little 20-watt iPad-style charger in the box, and it takes a painfully sluggish 2.5 hours to juice it all the way back up to 100%. So, pro tip, you're going to want to plug this in well before it hits 0. You can technically use a 30-watt charger to shave off half an hour, but you'd have to buy that separately.
And finally, Section 6, the final verdict. To buy or not to buy. Let's give you that buyer's blueprint. Before you even think about hitting that checkout button, run through these 3 steps. 1. Confirm you honestly just need a daily browser and office machine. 2. Make your peace with the fact that you won't have backlit keys on the base model and you'll have one really slow port. And 3, this is absolutely crucial, check the current prices on the older M2 MacBook Air. Since the older Airs are slowly phasing out, you might just stumble on an insane discount for a significantly better M2 Air that makes settling for the Neo's compromises completely unnecessary. So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought. As a first-time buyer, is keeping that initial cash in your pocket really worth giving up a backlit keyboard and pro-level performance? Or is stepping up to a true MacBook Air still the ultimate starting point for you? Apple built the Neo as a highly capable daily driver to get you into their ecosystem, but only you can decide if the corners they cut to reach that price are corners you can actually live without. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.